They called the Norman hedgerows impassable. 12-foot walls of earth and roots, older than the United States itself, stacked across the French countryside like the ribs of a giant buried beneath the soil. To American tank crews in July 1944, they were something worse: execution grounds. A Sherman tank climbing a hedgerow had to reveal its belly armor, the thinnest plate on the entire vehicle. German Panzerfaust teams waited for that exact moment. One shot, one plume of flame, one burning tank. And every day, American crews died repeating the same maneuver. But on July 8th, 1944, something happened that shouldn't have happened. Something that contradicted every manual, every ordnance officer, every engineer, every general. A single Sherman tank pushed through a hedgerow at ground level, cleanly, smoothly, and without lifting its nose. The tank didn't climb. It didn't expose its belly. It cut through the wall like a plow. The story spread through the 102nd Cavalry Recon Squadron like wildfire. Some said it was magic. Some said it was luck. But the tank commander, Sergeant Curtis Grubb Cullen, knew exactly what had happened. He had taken the enemy's own beach defenses, useless piles of captured steel, and turned them into something new, something the Germans had never prepared for. He had welded 4 crude prongs onto the bow of a Sherman. Scrap metal, beach trash, supposedly worthless, until it wasn't. Those 4 prongs would change everything about the Normandy campaign. They would save an estimated 1,500 American tankers. They would break open the bocage in 48 hours. They would transform military improvisation forever. But before all that, before Operation Cobra, before the First Army began sawing through France like a blowtorch through armor, there was only one thing. A sergeant with a welding torch, looking at burning tanks, and refusing to accept that this was the only way. This is the story of the Cullen Cutter, the junkyard invention that changed World War II. The USS Batfish had spent so many nights drifting in hostile waters that even the sound of the sea had changed for the men. It no longer whispered, it watched. Every wave slapping against the steel hull felt like a coded message from the enemy. I know you're here. But tonight, above the pitch-dark surface, the sky opened with a clarity the crew hadn't seen in weeks. Stars hung motionless over the Pacific, sharp as blade tips, and Commander Fluckey allowed himself a single breath of calm. Only one, because below him, the real war kept pulsing, silent, invisible, and unforgiving. Inside the control room, the red lighting made every face look carved from clay. Ensign Paul Saunders hunched over the radar scope, scanning the coastline of Kyushu with a surgeon's precision. The men were restless. The shoreline was so close now that they could smell pine. That alone made everyone more aware that they were trespassing on the one place every American sailor had been told they'd never, ever set foot: the Japanese home islands. "Commander," Saunders whispered, "I'm picking up faint rail activity. Same line as before. Looks like the midnight freight." Fluckey leaned over his shoulder, eyes narrowing in the dim red glow. A train, exactly what they needed, not for its destruction, but for its light. If a train was running, it meant the track wasn't guarded. If the track wasn't guarded, the coastline might be unpatrolled. And if the coastline was unpatrolled, 8 submariners could walk straight into history. Behind them, torpedo man Billy Newcomb muttered, "If they find us here, we're done. They'll turn this whole bay into soup." "Then let's not be found." Fluckey answered gently, too gently, which meant he was thinking hard. He studied the Japanese shoreline through the periscope. Jagged cliffs, a single thin beach, a faint glow of a village beyond. This wasn't just dangerous, it was ridiculous. A submarine captain sending his men ashore, onto Japan, for a demolition mission, at night, without backup, without extraction if things went wrong. No admiral in the Navy would have approved it. But there was no admiral here, just the quiet, the dark, and the responsibility of 80 lives waiting for the orders of one man. He lowered the scope. "Time to wake our shore party," Fluckey said. Around the compartment, the men stiffened. They all knew what that meant. History was about to turn on 8 pairs of boots, a handful of explosives, and the nerve of a commander who believed the impossible was simply something the enemy hadn't considered yet. And above the sub, the stars burned on, silent witnesses to a mission no one would believe until the world saw the smoking wreckage. They were already awake. Fluckey hadn't even opened the forward compartment hatch when he heard the hushed, focused movements inside. Boots laced, knives strapped, demolition cord checked twice, 3 times. These weren't commandos. They weren't Marines. They weren't even volunteers from some elite frogman outfit. They were submariners, men who spent their lives in steel tubes, not on shorelines. And yet every one of them had stepped forward the moment Fluckey hinted at an operation ashore. Inside, the air smelled of machine oil and damp canvas. Chief Petty Officer Lucky Gilmore was helping Seaman First Class Robert Williams secure a waterproof bag of TNT to his chest. Williams muttered, "Feels like hugging a brick of death." "Good," Gilmore said, tightening the straps. "Means you'll hold on to it." Ensign Sam Deal, young, sharp-eyed, carrying the constant tension of wanting to impress Fluckey, approached the commander. "Sir, winds are calm. Tide's receding. We'll have about 40 minutes before it comes back in. After that, the beach disappears. Then you'll make it back in 30, Fluckey said. Deal nodded, but his throat worked. He knew what everyone on the submarine knew. If the tide swallowed the beach, the shore party would have to swim back in open water, across a bay patrolled by Japanese searchlights, machine guns, and the occasional bored fisherman with a very loud voice. Fluckey stepped into the compartment, and the men stiffened. He looked at each one, making deliberate eye contact. Gilmore, Deal, Williams, McGowan, Harris, Yowell, Goyette, and Frank Bowen. The last one cinching an equipment strap with the steadicom of a man who had long ago accepted that life at sea was a negotiation with chaos. "You know why you were chosen," Fluckey began quietly. "Not because you're the bravest, not because you're the toughest, because you're the most level-headed damn crew this submarine has. And because what you're about to do, no one has ever done. A beat, no breathing, just the hum of machinery. You're going ashore on Japan." The words hung like a knife. Fluckey continued, "Your goal is simple. Plant the charges. Blow the train line. Make it look like an accident, something their commanders will chalk up to carelessness. And get back to this submarine alive. Every single one of you." Gilmore cracked a small grin. "Preferably with all our limbs, sir." "No promises," Fluckey said, "but I'd prefer it too." The men laughed, quick, sharp, nervous. The kind of laugh sailors used to keep the dark from getting inside their heads. Saunders appeared behind Fluckey, breathless. "Commander, train's slowing. Might be stopping soon." "Perfect." Fluckey turned back to the 8 shadows in front of him. "This is your window. Once you leave this boat, you're on your own. No gunfire from us. No backup. Silence only." He paused. "And remember, if you're caught, the Navy will deny everything because they'll never believe I sent you in the first place." Gilmore let out a low whistle. "That's comforting. Let's go," Fluckey said. The submarine surfaced silently, like a beast rising from the deep. The hatch opened. Cold, salty air swept into the compartment. One by one, the 8 men climbed the ladder, faces set, silhouettes sharp against the starlight. They lowered the small rubber boat into the black water. Gilmore looked back at the submarine, a dark mountain of steel, and gave a short salute. "See you in an hour," he whispered. Then the oars dipped, the boat drifted toward the Japanese coast, and the darkness swallowed them. 8 shadows leaving the safety of the deep for the enemy's shore. History beginning one quiet stroke at a time. The first thing they heard was nothing. Not waves, not wind, not crickets, not even the far-off hum of a village generator. Just a vast, unnatural silence that felt occupied, like the land itself was listening. Gilmore dipped his paddle slower, quieter, as the rubber boat eased toward the invisible line where ocean became Japan. The sky was moonless, stars thin behind a passing marine haze. Perfect for hiding, terrible for landing. Every few seconds, McGowan glanced over his shoulder, hoping to catch the faint outline of Barb offshore. But the submarine had already vanished into the black. "Beach should be dead ahead," Deal whispered. Should be, Gilmore muttered. A soft scrape sounded beneath them sand. They had arrived. The 8 men moved with careful precision. No words, no metal on metal, no gear left unsecured. They dragged the boat onto the beach just high enough that the tide wouldn't snatch it too soon. The sand was coarse, damp, and smelled faintly of pine resin drifting from the unseen forest beyond. Yowl froze. Stop. Hear that? Everyone dropped into a crouch. Footsteps. Not many. 2, maybe 3, moving somewhere inland. Soft thuds, measured and unhurried. The stride of men who lived here and had no reason to fear the dark. Japanese sentries on a rotation. Gilmore motioned left with 2 fingers, and the team drifted toward the narrow dirt path leading up from the beach. The footsteps faded. Deal exhaled. They almost stepped on us. Keep moving, Gilmore whispered. The path led into a dense thicket where trees grew low and tangled, perfect for concealment. The shoreline behind them disappeared almost instantly. Ahead, the land sloped upward toward the rail embankment, a raised bed of gravel and timber, carrying a single-track spur used for coastal supply runs. Their target, Seaman Williams, quietly unzipped the waterproof bag, checking the charges for what had to be the 15th time. The TNT bricks were dry, the fuse lengths exact. The timing device simple enough to survive a fall off a moving truck. Gilmore stopped again, this time raising a clenched fist. A lantern glow flickered ahead through the trees. Voices. Japanese. Calm. Conversational. Bowen leaned forward, whispering directly into Gilmore's ear. Work party? No, Gilmore murmured. Probably fishermen or track watchers. If they see us, we're cooked. The men sank silently to the forest floor as 2 figures appeared on the path above them, carrying a lantern and what looked like a coil of rope and a bucket. They were talking about something mundane, crops, weather, fish, none of the sailors could tell. The lantern passed within 15 feet of their hiding place. Every man held his breath until the glow faded completely. Only then did Gilmore tap twice on the ground. Move. They emerged from the brush at the base of the rail line. The wooden ties stretched east to west like an unbroken spine. Steel rails gleamed faintly with dew. Deal crouched low and studied the slope. Charges go here, here, and here. Enough to bend the rails and topple a train. Not blow it sky high, Gilmore reminded. Accident, not sabotage. McGowan began digging shallow pockets under the ties with a small trenching tool. Slow, deliberate scoops of earth. They placed the charges, concealed them with gravel, and secured the fusing. Harris kept watch uphill. Yowl watched the direction of the beach. Bowen checked the time every 30 seconds. Everything was going smoothly. Too smoothly. Then from far down the track, a faint metallic clink, clink, clink drifted toward them. The sound of an approaching train rolling slowly over distant joints in the rail. Harris's head snapped up. Train. Early. No, Gilmore whispered. Perfect, because if the train was already inbound, their window was closing fast. And they had minutes to get off Japanese soil before the entire coastline lit up. The first low rumble reached them like distant thunder, rolling along the metal rails and through the ground beneath their boots. Every man froze. The original timetable they'd memorized suggested a train would pass just before dawn, hours from now. But this one was early. Too early. That meant 2 possibilities. Either the Japanese were shifting schedules because of increased submarine attacks, or they suspected something. Gilmore didn't waste a second. Pack up now. We're leaving. McGowan snapped his trenching tool shut and swept loose gravel over the last charge. Deal clipped the safety wire flush with the rail, burying it just enough that even a cautious sentry would have to get on his hands and knees to see it. Williams closed the explosive satchel and slung it across his back. Their work was done, just in time. The rumble grew louder. Harris crawled to the slope's crest and peeked his head over the rail bed. A faint headlamp glow shimmered through the trees, far down the line, but approaching fast. We got maybe 3 minutes before it's on top of us. Then we're ghosting too, Gilmore said. They scrambled down the embankment and re-entered the brush, moving carefully. Silent steps, no snapped twigs, no gear clattering. Their exit route followed a narrow game trail toward the shoreline. But before they reached the midpoint, Yowl raised a hand. Voices again, and these were close. 2 Japanese soldiers moved through the trees parallel to the tracks, rifles slung casually over their shoulders, cigarettes glowing faint red in the dark. They weren't on alert, just bored, tired men checking for fallen branches or washouts on the trail. But bored men with rifles could still end the mission. Gilmore mouthed down. The team melted into the undergrowth. The soldiers passed, so close McGowan swore he could smell the tobacco on their uniforms. One of them paused, taking a long drag, exhaling a thin stream of smoke that drifted directly over the Americans' hiding spot. No one moved. No one breathed. Finally, the pair wandered off, their cigarettes bobbing like fireflies in the dark. Gilmore tapped twice on McGowan's boot. Go! They resumed their way toward the beach, weaving through the trees like shadows. Behind them, the approaching train groaned louder, steel grinding, a heavy diesel engine straining under a full load. Closer, closer, closer. Then, a sharp crack echoed from the tracks, followed by another, and another. The charges had gone off. The sound wasn't explosive thunder. It was a controlled, concentrated wrenching of metal. The rails lifted, twisted, and bent under the blast, warping upward like a broken spine. 3 seconds later came the real noise. A catastrophic metallic shriek tore through the night as the locomotive hit the sabotage point. The front wheels lifted from the rails, slamming down sideways into the gravel. Sparks erupted. Boxcars slammed into each other, screaming as couplers snapped. A thunderous crash shook the ground, followed by the echoing roar of several cars tipping down the embankment. Birds exploded from the tree lane. Dogs barked in a nearby village. The entire coastline woke up. McGowan whispered, "Jesus." Gilmore grabbed his shoulder. "Move. Now." The Americans sprinted through the forest, every sense lit with urgency. They could hear shouting, Japanese voices calling orders, boots thudding, whistles blowing. Search patrols were already forming, but the sailors were no longer worried about the train. They were worried about the fact that the enemy was now between them and the shoreline. Harris slid to Gilmore's side. "We're cut off." Gilmore shook his head. "No, we find another path. We get to the boat, or this becomes a very short footnote in the war." They pushed deeper into the dark, toward a coastline they could no longer see, and where every second now meant the difference between escape and capture. The forest was no longer quiet. It pulsed with the frantic energy of a hornet nest kicked open. Japanese soldiers shouted orders in every direction, some distant, some terrifyingly close. Flashlight beams flickered through the trees, slicing the darkness into shifting bars of light. Dogs barked from the direction of the village. The search was spreading fast. Gilmore crouched behind a moss-covered log, raising a closed fist to halt the team. The men dropped instantly, their breathing controlled, their silhouettes flattened against the earth. They didn't need an explanation. They understood exactly what had happened. The train derailment was bigger than expected, much bigger. That meant the Japanese response would be aggressive, organized, and immediate. Yowl crawled beside him. "We can't go east. Too many voices. South puts us back on the tracks." "Beach is west," Harris whispered. "But the ridge is in the way." Gilmore stared through the trees, listening. The ridge was steep, more of a rocky hump than a climbable slope, but somewhere along its length there had to be a break. A low point, a runoff gully. Anything the team could slip through without silhouetting themselves on the skyline like targets at a rifle range. He tapped McGowan's shoulder. "Gimme the map." McGowan slid the oil-coated paper forward. Even in the dark, Gilmore's finger found the approximate terrain lines. His voice was barely audible. "There, that low ground. If it's real, we can get through. If it's not, deal asked. Then we fix bayonets and hope we're better in the dark." They moved, slow at first. Careful footfalls, bodies low, gear secured with strips of cloth to prevent clatter. They weren't just hiding. They were threading a needle through a forest full of armed men. A single cough could end them. The crash site noise still thundered behind them. Shouts grew sharper. Lights grew brighter. A whistle shrilled in the distance. Someone, maybe an officer, was directing patrols outward like spokes from a wheel. The Americans slipped between two cedar trunks, emerging into a shallow ravine. The ground dipped sharply, exactly what Gilmore had hoped for. "Down," he whispered. They slid into the gully, half crawling, half sliding. Roots snagged their sleeves. Rocks scraped their palms. But the depression hid them completely from any searcher scanning the forest floor at that level. Then, crunch, a single footstep from above. Everyone froze. A Japanese soldier stood on the ridge right above them, no more than 6 feet away. The silhouette of his helmet was framed in faint moonlight. His rifle hung loosely from one hand as he leaned forward, listening. The team held still. Seconds passed. 10, 20. Deal's arms trembled from holding his weight perfectly suspended above loose gravel. Harris could feel a drop of sweat tickling down his back, but he didn't dare brush it away. The soldier exhaled sharply, spat, adjusted his helmet, and moved on, boots crunching through pine needles as he disappeared into the trees. Gilmore waited 3 more seconds before he moved again. "Go," he whispered, quiet and fast. The ravine bent northwest, guiding them like a natural hallway. And then, finally, it opened into a sloped clearing where the trees thinned and the faint glimmer of the ocean appeared between branches. The sea. They were close. Close enough to smell the salt. But as they approached the final line of trees, Yowl grabbed Gilmore's sleeve and pointed. A Japanese patrol was standing on the beach. 4 men, rifles, a lantern, and a direct line of sight to the ocean, precisely where the Batfish would surface for the pickup. Harris whispered the thought all of them shared. "They're waiting for us." Gilmore's jaw tightened. "No," he said. "They're guarding the coast because of the crash." He looked out at the dark water. "But if they stay there, we're not getting off this island." The team exchanged a glance. Their mission had one last problem to solve. The 4-man Japanese patrol stood exactly where the Americans needed to be. Their lanterns swayed gently in the breeze, throwing long, spidery shadows across the sand. Every few seconds, a soldier turned toward the water, scanning the dark horizon with the bored vigilance of someone who didn't expect trouble, but would react instantly if it appeared. The worst possible place for a pickup. Gilmore lowered himself beside a fallen tree trunk, motioning the others to gather close. Their faces were tight, eyes reflecting the faint beach glow. Every man understood the stakes. They were within sight, literal sight, of escape, yet blocked by a patrol that hadn't been there an hour earlier. Harris whispered, "They're not searching, just guarding." "Doesn't matter," Gilmore said softly. "They're between us and the water. We can't signal the Batfish with them standing right there." McGowan scanned the beach with careful, practiced eyes. "We could wait. Patrol might rotate." Gilmore shook his head. "No time. The skipper will surface at the rendezvous point. He's not going to sit inshore for long. If we miss him," he didn't finish. He didn't need to. Deal leaned forward, voice low. "We take them out silently." "Negative," Gilmore said. "Gunfire brings a platoon down on us. And if even one of them gets off a shout, we're dead before we hit the surf." Silence. The waves hissed, retreating across the sand. In another life, it might have sounded peaceful. Yowl suddenly tapped Gilmore's arm. "Look there. Tide pools." He pointed to a dark patch of jagged rocks extending into the water. A natural breakwater. The patrol's lantern cast wide light on the open beach, but those rocks created a shadowed channel along the shoreline. Only a few yards wide, partially flooded, narrow enough to scrape shoulders on both sides, but invisible from the patrol's position unless a man walked directly onto it. Gilmore studied it for several seconds, mapping the path in his head. "It'll take us straight to the surf," he murmured. Harris frowned. "It's sharp and loud. One misstep." "We don't misstep," Gilmore replied. "We move slow, we stay low, and we let the rocks eat our uniforms instead of our lives. The men exchanged determined nods. Gilmore crawled to the edge of the tree-line and peered again at the patrol. Two were chatting quietly. One sat on an ammo crate, cleaning the sand from his boots. The last paced with his rifle slung casually behind him. None of them watched the rocks. Perfect. Gilmore turned back to the team. This is it. Stay tight. No talking. Follow my lead exactly. We hit those rocks, slide to the waterline, and pray the skipper's where he said he'd be. He looked each man in the eyes, steady and unblinking. Remember, quiet as life. They moved. One by one, they slipped from the trees and into the shadow of the rocky outcrop. The first scrape of boots against stone sounded deafening to their own ears, but the waves masked it. Then they began the crawl. Hands pressed to wet rock, knees sliding into shallow tidal pools, bodies flattened so low they could feel barnacles brushing their sleeves. Behind them, the patrol continued its lazy vigil, unaware that 8 Americans were slipping past them like ghosts. Ahead, the sea waited. Somewhere beyond the breakers, the Batfish crept toward the rendezvous point. They were almost there. The rocks ended as abruptly as they had begun. One moment the sailors were crawling over razor-edged stone. The next they were sliding into packed, wet sand only inches above the tide. A curtain of black water stretched before them, calm, glassy, and moonlit in broken fragments. Somewhere beneath that surface, a U.S. submarine was threading its way toward shore. Gilmore raised a fist. The team froze. He scanned the horizon. There, just a faint, unnatural ripple a few hundred yards out. Something moving slowly against the tide. Something large. The skipper's here, Gilmore whispered. But the Batfish couldn't surface blindly. She needed confirmation, their confirmation. And that meant they had to send the one signal they all dreaded making. Williams slid forward, removing the small, waterproof flashlight from inside his shirt. They all knew the code. 3 flashes, pause, 2 flashes. It was the simplest, fastest way to mark friend from foe. The trouble was that the patrol on the beach would also see it. Unless everything worked perfectly, Gilmore positioned the men like a human wall, blocking the flashlight from any angle except directly out to sea. They crouched low, shoulders tight, forming a narrow tunnel of darkness between their bodies. Williams raised the light. 1 chance, he whispered. 3 flashes. Pause. 2 flashes. For a moment, nothing. Then the water bulged. The Batfish surfaced with a slow, deliberate rise, her conning tower emerging like a steel shark breaking the skin of the ocean. No lights, no noise, only a ripple spreading outward as she steadied herself. Harris exhaled. Beautiful. Gilmore snapped his fingers. Move. Quiet and fast. They stood as one, sprint crouching across the last strip of sand, boots sinking deep with each step. Every sound seemed too loud. The click of gear, the slap of water, the rush of their own breath. But the patrol's lanterns still glowed steady and unbothered behind the rocks. The Japanese hadn't seen them. Yet, the sailors hit the surf. Cold Pacific water soaked them instantly to the waist. They waded deeper, turning into the small waves, pushing hard against the current. The Batfish's hatch cracked open. A silhouette appeared, Fluckey. He cupped his hands around his mouth and whispered, barely audible even across the quiet water. Faster. The boat couldn't linger. If it rested too long at shallow depth, Japanese patrol boats, aircraft, or coastal guns could pin it against the shore. The sailors pushed harder, water up to their chests now. Gilmore took the lead, cutting through the waves with practiced, confident strokes. Behind him, the others kept tight formation, each man determined not to fall behind. Then, movement on the beach. One of the Japanese sentries paused, turned toward the water, squinted. Gilmore saw it. Don't stop. Don't look back. The sailors closed the final 50 yards in a frantic, splashing rush. The Batfish's crew reached over the hull, arms extended, hauling the first men aboard. Harris grabbed a railing. McGowan was shoved up from below. Deal slipped once, went under, came up spitting water. and a deckhand caught his wrist at the last second. Gilmore was the last in line. The sentry shouted something behind them. A shot cracked through the night. The bullet hit the surf 5 feet from Gilmore's leg. Hands seized his arms. 2 sailors from the deck, straining, pulling, lifting. "Get him in." Gilmore rolled onto the deck, lungs burning, uniform soaked, heart thrashing. "Dive, dive, dive," Fluckey shouted. The hatch slammed. The Batfish sank beneath the surface, and the ocean swallowed every trace of them before the second shot ever reached the water. The Batfish dropped fast. The hull groaned as seawater closed over it, pressure rising with every foot. Inside, the red battle lamps flicked on, casting the cramped control room in a dim, blood-colored glow. Men moved quickly but quietly. Every action crisp, rehearsed, automatic. No one celebrated. Not yet. Fluckey steadied himself against the bulkhead. "Take us to 90 feet, he ordered. "Rig for silent running." Valves hissed. Motors wound down. The submarine transformed from a roaring machine into a drifting shadow, slipping beneath the waves like a ghost afraid to disturb the water. The rescue team stood in the narrow passageway, soaked and trembling, not from cold, but from the adrenaline that still clawed at their nerves. Their clothes dripped onto the steel deck. Their boots squelched, but they were alive. Gilmore leaned against the bulkhead, catching his breath. "We cut that close." Fluckey walked over, eyes sharp, face unreadable. "Report." Gilmore straightened. "Charges placed. Train derailed. Significant damage." He paused. Enemy response was immediate. Patrols everywhere. Nearly compromised. Fluckey nodded once. "But not compromised." He looked at the men. "You brought them all back. That's a damn fine job." A few of the crew exchanged tired smiles. Deals slid to the floor, back against the wall, breathing deeply. McGowan wrung seawater from his sleeves. Harris stared up at the ceiling, letting the reality settle in. They had returned from a place submariners were never supposed to be, the land. Fluckey clapped Gilmore on the shoulder. "Get dry. Doc will check you all out." Then his tone shifted, quiet, serious. "We're not out of danger yet." He pointed to a sonar operator who sat rigid at his station, headphones pressed tight. The man lifted one finger. "Screws bearing 190. Fast." A Japanese patrol boat. Gilmore closed his eyes for one brief moment. "They're coming for the wreck. And anything that caused it," Fluckey said. The submarine was silent now. Completely. No pumps. No fans. No unnecessary movement. Every man's breath felt too loud. The sonar operator whispered, "Second contact. Smaller. Maybe a launch. A search net. The kind designed to trap submarines near shore." Fluckey folded his arms. "They'll sweep outward from the crash site. We need to slip past the outer line before they close it." "Speed?" Gilmore asked. "Too loud. We stay slow. Controlled. One mistake, and they'll pick us up." Deal muttered. "Feels like we're sneaking out of the island all over again." The submarine descended a few more feet, stabilizing at 93. The metal hull creaked softly in the pressure. Men held perfectly still, as though movement itself could summon the enemy. Sonar clicked faintly, steady, rhythmic. Then it grew sharper. "Patrol boat turning," the operator whispered. "Heading our way." A pulse of tension rippled down the narrow corridor. Gilmore breathed slowly through his nose. Harris clenched his jaw. McGowan tucked his hands under his armpits to stop them from shaking. Even the seasoned submarine crew felt it. The unmistakable weight of being hunted in the dark. The operator's voice dropped to a thread. Bearings stable, closing. Fluckey leaned forward. "Elm, come left, 2 degrees. Very slow." The Batfish tilted so gently it felt like a shift of thought rather than movement. The patrol boat's engines thundered through the water. Closer, closer, closer. Men stared at the deck, refusing to breathe too deeply. The operator raised a trembling hand. "Passing," he whispered. A long moment. Still passing. Then finally, contact moving away. The tension snapped in a silent exhale across the boat. Shoulders slumped. Eyes closed. Someone quietly muttered a prayer of thanks. Fluckey didn't smile. Not yet. We keep moving, he said. Nice and quiet. They're still out there. Gilmore nodded. Until we're deep water, nobody relaxes. The Batfish drifted through the blackness, a steel shadow carrying 8 exhausted saboteurs and an entire submarine crew toward the safety of the open Pacific. They had escaped the island. Now they had to escape the hunters. The night turned feral. Fluckey felt it before he heard it. A vibration in the steel, a tremor running through metal like a nerve twitch. Then the wind rose outside, shoving the barb sideways with a force that made even the veteran helmsman swear under his breath. The Pacific was no longer water and air. It was a grinder. Sheets of black water hammered the bridge windows. The sky vanished completely, replaced by a single colorless smear. Somewhere in that chaos, thunder cracked, but it sounded too sharp, too metallic. Not thunder, explosions. From shore, the Japanese knew they'd been hit. Contacts, Fluckey barked, though everyone already knew no radar beam could penetrate the weather. Nothing, Captain. The operator slapped the console in frustration. Below deck, the 8-man landing team had returned, soaked, shivering, still smelling faintly of gunpowder and machine oil from the sabotage. One seaman was coughing violently, seawater still in his lungs from the brutal surf that had nearly swallowed them during re-entry. The barbed dove, but the storm followed them underwater like something alive. Even submerged, the ocean beat at the hull, each impact echoing through the sub like a punch. Then came the sound no submariner ever forgets. Ping. Ping, ping. 3 destroyers sweeping the coast. Fluckey closed his eyes for half a heartbeat. In calm waters, they could outmaneuver them. In this, it was a coffin waiting to be sealed. Hard to starboard. Keep her deep. Ride the thermocline, he ordered, voice steady even as the deck tilted dangerously. The sub groaned. A pipe burst somewhere aft. Men grabbed rails to stay upright as the storm above churned the sea like a mixer. Depth charges incoming. The first explosion hammered them like a giant's fist. The second slammed, so close the lights flickered. Dust rained down from the seams. A wrench clattered across the deck. But the third was too close. A detonation that felt like the world splitting open. Fluckey's head snapped toward the aft bulkhead. One of the gauges suddenly spiked red. Sir, rear ballast tank damage, slow flooding. A new silence formed. Not the silence of fear. The silence of a crew doing math in their heads. How long until the ocean claims us? Could they patch the damage before the next charge? Would there even be a next minute? Fluckey grabbed the intercom. His voice cut clean through the chaos. Men, hold fast. The Barb has outrun every ship that ever hunted her. She'll outrun these two. Another explosion thundered overhead. The hull rang like a bell. And still, Fluckey's voice didn't waver. Prepare to rise. We're going through the storm and straight past them. The crew stared at him. Through that raging sea, past 3 destroyers, blind, half-flooded, he met their eyes one by one. Gentlemen, trust the boat. A hand slowly tightened around the dive controls. A switch flipped. The bow angled upward. The USS Bar began to rise toward the storm, toward the impossible, and toward history. The ocean above them was pure chaos, a violent tangle of wind, rain, and waves towering higher than a man could imagine. The Barb creaked as if every steel plate were screaming in protest. Lightning split the sky in jagged white veins, illuminating the dark water with brief, cruel flashes. The crew gritted their teeth, hands clamped over controls, feet braced against bulkheads. Every muscle screamed from tension, from exhaustion, from the knowledge that one mistake could mean death. Fluckey stood at the helm, eyes scanning instruments that seemed to flicker like ghosts. Every reading was critical. Depth, tilt, sonar, ballast, speed. One misread, one hesitation, and the Pacific would swallow them. The destroyers were still out there, pounding the waves with searchlights and sonar, but the storm masked their approach. It was a dangerous ally. Hold steady, Fluckey barked. Keep her on the rise. This is our window." The sub shuddered violently, buffeted by a wave so massive it felt like a mountain had fallen on the hull. A loose bolt clanged somewhere, ricocheting down the corridor. Below deck, the landing team clung to whatever they could, knuckles white, teeth clenched. The adrenaline was unbearable, yet their training took over. Each movement calculated, precise, silent. Another sonar ping rang sharp and urgent. 2 contacts closing fast, the operator reported. The voice was calm, but every syllable carried the tension of men who understood what those contacts could mean. Fluckey didn't hesitate. "Adjust starboard 2 degrees. Keep depth steady. Use the storm." He pointed toward the gray, swirling horizon above. "It's our shield. They won't see us until it's too late." The sub's bow broke the surface in a sudden, violent lurch. Spray whipped over the deck, freezing in the wind. Lightning flashed again, and for a heartbeat, the destroyer's silhouettes appeared. 4 dark shapes cresting waves, searchlights sweeping blindly into the storm. They were close enough to feel, yet too blinded to strike. "Go!" Fluckey shouted. "All ahead flank." Straight past them, the barb surged forward, slicing through the monstrous waves. The wind tore at everything not bolted down, yet the men pressed on. Fluckey's eyes never left the horizon, calculating angles, speed, and timing. The destroyers fired sporadically, rounds that splashed harmlessly in the tumultuous water. Each blast shook the hull, yet the submarine's momentum carried them through the chaos. Below deck, the landing team exhaled together, feeling the first taste of safety. The adrenaline slowly ebbed, replaced by numb disbelief. They had survived the beach, the patrols, the surf, and now this storm. Above them, the storm screamed on, indifferent to human struggle. But beneath its fury, the barb moved with silent precision, a predator navigating the eye of destruction. Commander Fluckey allowed himself a brief, controlled smile. They weren't just surviving, they were escaping. And in the next few minutes, history would remember why no one else had attempted what they had done that night. The storm began to abate as the barb slipped further from the coastline. The wind was still fierce, the waves still tall, but the destroyers had been left behind, blinded by the tempest and the skill of the submarine crew. The men exhaled collectively, the tension of hours folding into a mix of exhaustion and awe. 8 men who had set foot on Japanese soil were alive. 8 men who had never expected to survive the landing were now returning, not as stories whispered in the mess hall, but as witnesses to history. Fluckey watched the horizon, eyes scanning the black line where sea met sky. Every ripple and shadow told a story, every sensor reading a possibility. The barb was bruised, battered, but undefeated. The waves might have tried to crush them, the patrols to capture them, yet they had outwitted every danger. And in that victory lay something more profound than survival. Proof that courage, ingenuity, and meticulous planning could bend even the impossible to human will. Below deck, the landing team finally allowed themselves to speak. Gilmore loosened his wet uniform, shaking water from his hair, laughter breaking through the tension. McGowan slumped against a bulkhead, shaking his head in disbelief. Deal quietly recounted the sabotage, detailing the precision and timing that had made it all possible. Harris simply stared at the ceiling, still half expecting the world to erupt beneath them. Fluckey walked among them, placing a hand on each shoulder. "What you did tonight," he said softly, voice carrying authority without pride, "is beyond what anyone thought possible. Not just the landing, not just the charges, but returning alive. That takes skill, nerve, and trust. You proved every assumption about this war wrong." The sub leveled out at 70 feet, gliding silently through calmer waters. The instruments hummed a steady, reassuring rhythm. Somewhere in the distance, lightning still etched fleeting white paths across the sky, but it no longer threatened them. They were masters of the deep now, moving under the veil of darkness and the ocean's embrace. Fluckey returned to the conning tower. Through the dim red lights, he could see the team resting, tired but safe. every man reflecting silently on what had been accomplished. No photographs, no headlines would immortalize this night. Only the men who lived it, only the Batfish, only the deep Pacific itself would remember. And yet, history would eventually know the impact. The sabotage had delayed Japanese movements along a critical supply line. The bravery and ingenuity of 8 men, and the submarine crew who dared to deliver them, would ripple outward, influencing strategy and morale across the Pacific theater. Lives were saved, battles subtly shifted, and a precedent was set. That audacity, precision, and unwavering resolve could, in a single night, change the course of war. Fluckey exhaled, letting the silence fill the conning tower. The waves whispered against the hull, the storm fading into memory. The men below were quiet, yet alive. Alive, and forever part of a mission that had no right to succeed, but did, against every expectation. The USS Batfish slipped deeper into the night, carrying history beneath the waves.